My name is Kimberly Praria. I am currently the executive director at Historic Fallsington, and my roots are pretty strong here in not New Jersey, but just across the river, that faraway land of Pennsylvania. And it's been a really fun journey. As Sam said, my unofficial museum career started at Pennsbury Manor, and so that site does hold a special place to my heart. But I do remember visiting Historic Fallsington as a kid as well. You don't grow up in Levittown and not go to Historic Fallsington Day, but more on that later. So I do want to just give a quick thank you to Sam and the other folks here at the Trent House Museum for inviting me to be a part of such a wonderful slate of speakers as part of their Summer of Revolution series. And I'm excited to share what I hope will be not such a black and white answer, as it were, as to the Fallsington Friends and other friends in the area and their involvement during the American Revolution. So it is rather fitting that I'm here with you all today after what seemed to be some pretty strong evidence of folks in the area and in Trenton specifically, either joining up in the cause on the Loyalist side and joining up on the Continental Army side. Oh, it worked, yay. All right, so today's presentation will focus on the Society of Friends in Fallsington and the region as we together explore the viewpoints and actions members took during the American War of Independence. And this is, I just wanted to start off by giving a little bit of information about Fallsington, not as Historic Fallsington, the organization, but more of the village. And this is a really fun quote that explains just a little bit about the region. Quote, "I inquired of this Indian king how far this river ran up into the country and whether it were navigable or no. He told me it ran a great way up and that I might go with my ship until I came to a certain place where the rocks ran clean across the river, and that there he thought I could not go over with my great canoes." For those of you who are good at spelling, just don't even try to read the screen. Spelling was not a universal form at that time, but basically they're describing the Delaware River. And for those of you that have studied much of history, you may be familiar with this late 17th century map that shows not just parts of Bucks County, but other areas, including West New Jersey. Ooh, very fancy. So in Fallsington, it was settled by an early group of settlers encouraged to come over by the founder of Pennsylvania, William Penn. And I am sorry that we don't have a better likeness of Mr. Penn there, but that's as it goes sometimes. The members of Fallsington were organized enough by early March of 1683 to form a membership for meeting. As many early settlers did, regardless of their faith tradition, they did start by meeting in homes of members on usually a rotating basis. But this particular group was able to construct a meeting house by July of 1690. It was noted as being approximately 20 feet by 25 feet and cost a whopping sum of 41 pounds. I'm not going to pretend we can easily translate how much money that is, but it's a lot. Now, the great thing is we can also note, thanks to the wonderful note-taking that the Society of Friends did during their various business meetings, that William Penn did occasionally attend meetings at the Fallsington Friends meeting when he was at his home or country estate, as it were, at nearby Pennsbury Manor. And for those of you who may not already know, he was in Pennsylvania for a whole 4 years, so not a lot of meetings being attended, but it is a fun sort of claim to fame for all of us in the area. By 1728, the Fallsington Friends meeting had the need to construct a larger meeting house. And this is a more recent photograph of it here. And they actually ended up using this space until 1789. So technically this is meeting house number 2. It is still standing, but is over the years has been used as a house with a small retail space, a boarding school, and since the 1940s, it has been divided up into 5 apartments. So a bit different intention than it was initially, but 1789, where were the Fallsington Friends meeting? I can see it on your faces. They began meeting in the large stone meeting house on the left of your screen at that time. This is when we really start to see a lot of the more traditional architectural styles of meeting houses amongst the various meetings throughout Pennsylvania and elsewhere. This photo does date to about 1911. And then in 1841, they constructed the meeting house that is on the right of your screen. And this is obviously a very modern photograph of it. But at one point, due to a schism amongst the Society of Friends and even in the quiet village of Fallsington, both meeting houses were being used, one by the Orthodox Friends and one by the Hicksite Friends. And I'd be happy to explain that a little bit more later, but given our focus today, I just wanted to mention that. Currently, the colorized photograph of the more modern meeting house is the one that is being used for meetings of worship amongst the current membership. The meeting house on the left is currently used as a private preschool. So the first meeting house is no longer standing, unfortunately, but the other 3 are. So why are we focusing on the Society of Friends or Quakers? William Penn and George Fox were noted as some of the early founders of the sect, and they were rather prolific in their writings. This particular treatise of oaths by William Penn, written in 1675, was in fact quoted as part of reasoning for the Testament of Integrity. Quote, "Men of virtue will speak truth without extortings, for oaths are a sort of racks to the mind, altogether useless where integrity sways." Wow. And that's just one quote. So imagine trying to read through this. It would take a lot of us some effort. Now, excuse me. Pennsylvania allowed those in state office to swear or affirm that they would abide by the laws as set forth, namely the Constitution of Pennsylvania as it was enacted in September of 1776, and we'll get back to that in a moment. But even today, those who do not take oaths can inform the courts or other government officials in advance that this is their belief system. And in Pennsylvania, they will be given accommodations, and the term that you even still see mostly to this day is the word affirm. So it's still an active practice to this day for many folks. Another key testament is the idea of the inner light, or the individual's direct communication with God. From the Journal of George Fox in 1694, quote, "that divine spirit which would lead them into all truth." Many meetings, especially in the 17th and well into the 18th century, did not have a leader of a meeting for their worship. Those attending were encouraged to speak their truth. And some modern meetings are still had in what's called a silent meeting versus having someone from the meeting sort of guide the meeting. So this is a very, very important tenet of the faith. The one we're most interested in, perhaps, is the peace testimony. Another really slightly difficult document to get through, but thanks to George Fox, it was printed publicly in 1660, is a declaration from the harmless and innocent people of God called Quakers against all plotters and fighters in the world. They really liked long descriptive titles in previous centuries. However, this was initially written as a public explanation to King Charles II, as members were being accused of treason and for attempting to overthrow the king. Some scholars have indicated that a full reading of the document suggests that members of the sect would not use the physical sword, but rather the spiritual one. And their hope was that a time would come when war was no longer necessary. So that's sort of where we get into that last line of the quote on the screen. And this is our testimony to the whole world. So it's a pretty complex document, but it's often quoted in bits and pieces as the supporting evidence for many meetings back in the 18th and earlier centuries, but also in modern day interpretation for current beliefs as they are always changing and being reevaluated. I would be remiss if I didn't try to explain a little bit more about the structure of the Society of Friends. Historically, they would meet for worship twice a week. Sunday is known often as the first day, and often on Wednesdays as well. Monthly meetings were typically business meetings that were often held along gender lines. The Bucks County quarterly meeting currently has 17 meetings of worship in its purview. And quarterly meetings, as the name indicates, would be held on a quarterly basis to allow for decisions to be made about issues and concerns that would affect those in the region. Philadelphia yearly meeting is sort of the overarching group in this region. And they would often gather, again, as the name indicates, on a yearly basis, although currently they often meet a bit more frequently as issues of import are needed to be discussed. I do want to just note also that in 1775, it's estimated that there were 30,000 individuals who were noted as practicing in the Society of Friends. So that's pretty wild. So we've sort of started with the general tenets of the faith, explaining a little bit more about the Society of Friends, but what about those in Fallsington? I know you're all just waiting with bated breath here. So I am going to read some of what's on the screen, just in case the font is a little bit more difficult. The names that are underlined were my doing to highlight those that were mentioned specifically. In early August of 1775, quote, the Falls report that Thomas Janney Jr., George Brown Jr., Joseph Shaw, Amos Shaw, and Thomas Linton have entered into the association to learn the military discipline. Various members are appointed to pay them a visit and treat with them tenderly on the occasion and report to next meeting. The phrasing that they use in the meeting minutes, I could just sit there all day and be delighted. It's very 18th century. It's very wordy and it's just lovely. So to explain that a little bit further, what they would do is members in good standing who obviously were not tempted to join in the military discipline or to learn the military discipline would visit with those that were mentioned earlier in the quote. And we know for a fact that they actually did that with those particular individuals, as seen here. Two of the friends appointed to treat with that long list of names we just mentioned report that they have took opportunity with them and that Joseph Shaw and Amos Shaw desired friends to wait with them another month, which meeting agrees to do. So we're not talking unreasonable folks here. We're, they're willing to wait. Maybe your conscience will cause you to rethink some things and change your mind about learning the art of the military discipline. And this was noted in October of 1775. So it's actually been more than a month at this point. Meanwhile, things are happening out in the larger world. Then there's this lovely note from, that's a continuation of that same item, but with regard to the others. They justified themselves in what they had done as looking upon it to be their duty, and were something illegible, and free friends should proceed as they thought best. Therefore, Malin Kirkbride, James Moon are appointed to prepare a testimony against them and produce to next meeting for approbation, and likewise acquaint them with the result. Basically, they're saying, okay, those guys decided to join in the military discipline, and we've talked to them about it, and we're telling you that we've talked to them about it. They have not changed their minds, and now we're going to write up a testimony against them, just noting that all of this has taken place per the proper procedures, if you will. In November of that same year, the Falls report that Mahlon Milner, Thomas Hutchinson, Mahlon Hutchinson, and Caleb Palmer have joined the association to learn the military discipline for which they have treated them, and they rather seem to justify themselves therein. We have a few more people who feel compelled to join up. And this is only at the next monthly meeting in 1775. So interesting. So what does that mean to join up in the military discipline in 1775? I will tell you, I am not a military historian, and folks who have spent a lifetime studying the establishment of the military in Pennsylvania are typically pretty honest about how confusing it all is, especially around the time of the American Revolution. So if anyone has further details to share as we go through, please do speak up. I do want to just try to explain it. And I do want to publicly thank Thomas Verina's article in the Journal of the American Revolution from June of 2014 called Explaining Pennsylvania's Militia. And he's pretty candid in saying it's really confusing, but come with me on this journey. Beginning in 1747, Benjamin Franklin used his easy access to the printing press to print, to encourage folks to create an official organization of military associations. And that's what you're seeing here on the screen. The title page there on the left is in English, and the one on the right is in German. Benjamin being very well aware of the large German-speaking population that had also settled in Pennsylvania, thanks to the encouragement and great marketing of Penn and his land agents. Now, also, Benjamin Franklin went so far as to print more singular broadsides to be posted throughout the city to encourage further support, and he also printed lottery tickets to raise funds to financially support the establishment of these military associations. And it seemed to have worked. By the time of the American War of Independence, with the concern about safety in Philadelphia and elsewhere, Pennsylvania established the Committee of Observation in each county, including Bucks County. And fortunately, previous historians have transcribed what meeting minutes were available. Simply put, their job was to sort of call out people who were speaking against the colonial government. But it's really fascinating stuff. In Bucks County, they first met in July of 1774. Quote, in this time of public distress, when by the operation of diverse acts of the British Parliament, the Americans are subjected to the universal control of a legislature in which they are not represented, the inhabitants of the county of Bucks, at a meeting held at Newtown, and it goes on and on and on, as they often did. But they first met here. They were meeting in people's homes that welcomed that opportunity. And You can see here that it is the duty of every American, when oppressed by measures either of ministry, parliament, or any other power, to use every lawful endeavor to obtain relief and to form and promote a plan of union between the parent country and colonies, in which the claim of the parent country may be ascertained and the liberties of the colonies defined and secured, and no cause of contention in future may arise to disturb the harmony so necessary for the interest and happiness of both. Wow. That's inspiring stuff, right? And ultimately, they want to work this out. But we all sort of know how that goes. It doesn't get much better by wishing and hoping, unfortunately. So the committee then taking into consideration a late resolve of the committee of the city of Philadelphia, setting forth an absolute necessity that the committees of the counties of this province or their deputies be requested to meet together in provincial convention on the 23rd day of January instant. This was printed in 1775, so we've jumped a few months ahead, but cannot conceive from any information we have had the necessity of such provincial convention, or that any good effects can be produced thereby towards carrying into execution the association so clearly pointed out to us by the Continental Congress. I wanted to include that these gentlemen and others voted to allow the gentlemen on the screen, Joseph Hart, John Wilkinson, Henry Wynkoop, Joseph Watson, and John Chapman, to be part of the Committee of Correspondence. And those folks were also in charge of kind of receiving any updates that the Committee of the City of Philadelphia, where the provincial government was meeting, with news, and to sharing that far and wide, with paying special attention to one John Chapman. We see him later. Okay, now they officially state the necessity, to form a military association in each township. In Falls Township and nearby, most muster rolls are dated to August of 1775. This quote comes from the Committee of Safety, dated to May 8th, 1775. And by early to mid-August, in most of the townships in Bucks County, they have formed up and filed the muster rolls dated to August of 1775. That will sound very familiar in just a moment. However, with some careful sleuthing and some careful notice here in this quote, is there a name on there that looks familiar? John Chapman is back. I told you, no trick questions here. A document from the Committee of Safety dated to July 21st of 1775 noted that these individuals, being of the people called Quakers and alleging scruples of conscience relative to the business necessarily transacted by the committee, desired to be relieved from any further attendance. So these folks specifically felt compelled to join up. They were very likely very active in their respective townships and communities. But as time progressed, as war became more and more imminent on the horizon, these individuals specifically asked to be removed. Now, how did the committee deal with that? I know you're all wondering, I can tell. The clerk of the committee was then directed to publish an advertisement asking anyone else chosen to serve to advertise within their respective townships. So people were expected to apply based on this sort of call for additional assistance. And just in case anyone is wondering, the faded image in the background is actually the Middletown Friends meeting built in 1793. And that is the meeting that John Chapman is from. So I wanted to just give a little shout out to John and his specific meeting. All right, this one is long. I'll try to summarize this. Basically, A complaint was filed by the Pennsylvania Committee of Safety to the Pennsylvania Assembly on the 29th of September, 1775, noting, I'm not even going to try to find a pointer on this. Oh, there's a pointer. Okay, noting, if you sort of read through it very quickly, that but as there are some persons who, from their religious principles, are scrupulous of the lawfulness of bearing arms. They're basically suggesting people who choose not to serve in these military associations should be fined. Keep that in mind, because that very idea does come up later. All right. Now, the Bucks County Committee of Observation voted for new members in January of 1777. Thomas Harvey, spoiler alert here, he actually ends up being the captain of the Bucks County Associators 1st Battalion, and he's listed on the muster rolls. And William Biles, whose family plot is circled on that late 17th century map there on the screen, his family was extremely active in the establishment of the Fallsington itself, but also the Fallsington Friends meeting. His ancestral home is it's believed to be the first home that was used for that newly formed Fallsington Friends meeting as a site for a meeting of worship. So interesting that Mr. Biles is now on the Bucks County Committee of Observation. But moving right along, it's trying to just get all the information out there. Here they're basically asking in March of 1776, and rather quickly, that we need assistance. You're asking us to form these military associations. We need assistance. So they are requesting that the members of the various associators in the various townships be pretty much ready to go at any time with an hour's warning. I'm not entirely sure how they would get word out to all of those folks so quickly, but that was the idea. They're also asking for the board to appoint proper persons to purchase muskets in their counties. Does anybody see an interesting element to that? It's the second bullet point on the screen. They want to purchase the muskets from people who aren't joining up. Or if people have spare muskets to be used by these battalions. Wow. Trust me, having read some of the minutes, people are called out for not complying with that request. And that those people need to go out there and they need to start doing this quick, because for the folks, again, to be ready with an hour's warning to march out, they need to be well supplied. They need to be well supplied. Okay. It gets better. We're moving fast and furious here. It's now April of 76. They are noting who the field officers are. There should be a name there that looks familiar to folks. Joseph Shaw was one of the Fallsington Friends. He's noted as the standard bearer for the field officers of the battalion. Oops, guess he decided to join even after he and his brother were afforded that extra month. They are also asking folks to note those who are deciding not to join and to bring that list back to the various meetings. And they're also recommending that there be places for folks to meet, and Falls is grouped together with Bristol. Today we would know that as Bristol Borough, and Middletown, which if you think of, for those folks who may know, the Middletown Friends meeting is actually in what is now Langhorne Borough. So it did include parts of what is now Langhorne. So it gets a little tricky. In July of 76, oh boy, lot of free time to be organized here. Again, officers, they're confirming who these folks are. Again, a lot of the same names. So even as the terms for some of the different groups who are working with the provincial government might change over the years, what we're noticing is that a lot of the folks, especially in a officer position, are in fact staying at if not at that same level of position or even being promoted. So we see a lot of the same names here. Okay, now this is a general order from General George Washington. I think some of you may have heard of him previously, while he was headquartered in Somerset. If any of you have been to that historic site, it is in now present day Marsville. It's lovely. And he sent this out to the colonels of the Bucks County militia on the 19th of December of 1776. Quote, joining in battalion with their arms and accoutrements in good order, and when to meet, march immediately to the city of Philadelphia, and there put yourself under the command of Major General Putnam. Things are moving fast here now, with needing supplies, needing accoutrements, needing these men to come together. This is a broadside printed by the Pennsylvania War Office that is noting who those county agents are. So now not only are we finding out who the county agents are from the Bucks County Committee meeting minutes, but now we're looking at May of 1777. And in Bucks County, the names of Joseph Kirkbride, John Gill, Samuel Smith, William Crawford, John Lacey, perhaps you've heard of him, Andrew Coughlin, Joseph Hart, James Benezet, Henry Winecoop, Major McIlvaine, John Kidd, and Richard Gibbs. Again, if you pay enough attention to some of these names noted in relation to the military, it's a lot of the same folks who are staying in command. Now, the new state constitution was ratified in September of 1776, thus dissolving the provincial assembly and the committees of safety. It also disbanded the associators with the passing of the militia law in March of 77. You thought what I just showed you was kind of crazy and hard to keep up with. We're now in 77 and the militia laws are in effect. And what that does is it basically just reorganizes a lot of this information. So it was important for the Pennsylvania War Office, now under this new form of government, to notify folks in the city and elsewhere who these agents were. And in 77, lo and behold, we have in Lower Makefield Township, we have Captain Joshua Anderson and later Captain Richard Stillwell, and in Falls Township, under the 7th Company, Captain Lambert Pittner. Right? And look, in 1780, in Lower Makefield Township, different company numbers, but Captain Richard Stillwell and Captain Lambert Pittner. So this is just to really further show how the company names would be reorganized, but a lot of the times the same officers would remain in place. Now, what became of our Fallsington friends? Here are their names in order, because I know it's asking a lot for you to remember all of these folks from previous slides. We're going to start with Thomas Janney. He's the one that we found the most information on, and he had a pretty remarkable career. And as we know, he did in fact decide to join up. So he ended up being in Colonel Robert McGall's 5th Pennsylvania Battalion of the Flying Camp. Some of you may be familiar with that. This was the battalion that was at the Battle of Fort Washington in New York on November 16th of 1776. You can see some of the details of that here on the screen, but he did in fact was initially listed with the Bucks County Associators in 1775. And I apologize, slightly fuzzy image on this, on the right side of your screen, is a copy of his pension records at the Library of Congress. So if you really just have a lot of free time, the Library of Congress website is really fantastic for research of Revolutionary War era things, but lots of other things. This is a 1776 watercolor done by a British officer at the time of the battle, and it's noting a lot that's going on at that battle of Fort Washington. So that's Thomas Janney. Yep, he definitely felt compelled enough to stay in the military discipline. But what about some of the others? Okay, George Brown, he was listed as a second lieutenant in August of 75 for Falls Township. Joseph Shaw, as we've seen already, was definitely with the Bucks County Associators, and then later in 76 with the 2nd Battalion of Associators as a standard bearer. Amos Shaw, a relative of his, was a private in the Falls Township roles. Thomas Linton, a private in the Lower Makefield roles, which makes trying to track down some of these folks a little bit more difficult, because although Lower Makefield is near to Falls Township, you sort of wonder what made them decide to go with Falls versus Lower Makefield. And it may have been just a personal affiliation with some of the other folks who decided to join that particular township. Malon Milner, I could not find anything. Malon Hutchinson, yeah, I know when he was born and when he died. Unfortunately, he lived to a ripe old age of 81. Thomas Hutchinson was listed in Captain Binkley's Militia Company, 3rd Battalion, New Britain, in January of 77. New Britain not being exactly nearby, so not entirely sure what his reasoning was for that. And Caleb Palmer is listed as a private. If the math is right on his birth date, he was at age 26 with the Lower Makefield Company in August of 75 as well. Now, there are a few other folks I do have to mention who are from Bucks County, not necessarily members of the Fallsington Friends meeting, but who some of you may have heard of. For example, John Lacey. He was from Bucks County, and he was a practicing member of the Society of Friends, but it was noted in a letter that, quote, "my passive and non-resisting principles," end quote, "are what compelled him to join up in the military." He joined in August of 1775, as many of his fellow former friends had done, as a captain. He was commissioned to captain the 4th Pennsylvania Battalion under Colonel Anthony Wayne in January of the following year. They did not get along. He resigned. Then he was a sub-lieutenant in Bucks County in March of 77. He was promoted to rank of lieutenant colonel and the command of the 4th Battalion of the Bucks County Militia in May of 77. And by January of 78 was appointed the brigadier general and served in that position until October of 1781. If any of you are familiar with Captain Lacey, he had some interesting viewpoints on how families in the area should be treated who were trying to reach some of the soldiers. But he was the leading force behind the Battle of Crooked Billet, which is what this monument out in Hatboro is commemorating. So it's, again, started out here in Bucks County, ended up in the Hatboro area, and having a pretty long and rather wild career in Pennsylvania. You may have also heard of Dr. James Hutchinson. He is noted as stating in a letter to some family members, quote, "I have too great an affection for my country not to feel its distresses." And that, again, is him basically saying, I have to join up. And he also had a rather long military career, but he was raised in the Quaker tradition, and he counts as some of his relatives people with the names of Pemberton maybe you've heard of them. Also, it was the Pembertons, Hutchinson, other family members were very active. So quite moved in some pretty remarkable circles. He was appointed senior surgeon of the flying camp of the Middle Department of the Continental Army in December of '77. It is believed he helped treat soldiers that were hurt during the Battle of Germantown. And he also is believed to have helped inoculate soldiers for smallpox during the winter encampment at Valley Forge. He was later in '78 appointed to be the surgeon of the Pennsylvania State Navy. And interestingly enough, was not disowned by the Society of Friends until February of '79. So what's interesting with that is folks were not necessarily disowned immediately, especially if they were assisting in a medical capacity. And that is something that even modern meetings are still trying to figure out, what their official stance is. He later became one of the founders of the College of Physicians in Philadelphia in '87. He joined the staff at Penn Medical School in '90 and sadly died in 1793 while assisting to provide treatment to those suffering from the yellow fever epidemic. So again, incredibly intelligent, grew up in the Quaker tradition, a rather wealthy family, and felt compelled to join as well. He is buried at the Arch Street Meeting Friends, although in the 18th century, they did welcome non-friends or friends who were no longer in good standing to be buried there. They pretty much opened it up to everybody. It was later that it became just for friends. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, what are our friends in Philadelphia doing? Well, this is where it also gets pretty interesting. On the left is published in January of 1775 from the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. And if you recall, that was the sort of umbrella organization who oversaw a lot of the more local meetings. This was a testimony published as a response by members in the region to ongoing calls to join against Britain. Statistically, the Society of Friends kind of, as we're seeing, and I hope is obvious, some joined, some didn't, some technically didn't join and maybe were kind of neutral. But the testimony pictured here on the right, published a year later, almost to the day, gave a more detailed explanation, quote, with respect to the king and government. And they're basically saying we are choosing not to take arms based on some of that earlier peace testimony that I shared with you previously. So what does that mean for the Philadelphia Quakers? Well, for some of them, it didn't go so well. There's a group of primarily very wealthy Philadelphia Quakers who were arrested in September of 1777. And although given the opportunity by the Supreme Executive Council to not be arrested, all they had to do was, quote, take and subscribe the oath or affirmation required by law to assure their fidelity and true allegiance. None of them did. Their faith tradition was that strong, they did not feel compelled to do so, which meant that at about 3 p.m. on September 11th, they were to meet at what was known as the lodge, some personal belongings, and they were put into wagons and they were transported initially to Pottsgrove, Pennsylvania, then to Reading, Lancaster, Carlisle, and almost 2 months later, they eventually made their way to Winchester, Virginia. They remained there until April of the following year. And fortunately, their travels back home took significantly less time, and most of them arrived back to Philadelphia at the end of April. Now, what's interesting to note is their departure on September 11th of '77 was delayed due to, anyone know what battle that was that took place that day? September 11th is just not a good day, sadly. September 11th was the Battle of Brandywine, which was a pretty gruesome experience for everyone involved. And they literally were delayed because they could hear the cannons firing even in Philadelphia. And I do just want to quickly point out the silhouette of Henry Drinker is included because he was one of those Virginia exiles who was sort of deported, I guess you can say. So, however, now we come to the group of people who call themselves the Free Quakers. Free Quakers, Kimberly, what are you talking about? This was a group of folks who responded to some of the earlier broadsides put forth by the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. The broadside is included here on the left. In April of 1781, one of the main points highlighted here on the screen, quote, "We have no new doctrine to teach, nor any design of promoting schisms in religion. We wish only to be freed from every species of ecclesiastical tyranny and mean to pay a due regard to the principles of our forefathers and to their rules and regulations so far as they apply to our circumstances, and hope thereby to preserve decency and to secure equal liberty to all." It's basically an explanation of why they're deciding to bear arms. In August of that same year, they publish another document spread throughout the city for public distribution to explain why they're taking to arms. So a lot of time, some money to share their reasonings, but clearly this was enough of an issue for them to want to publicly address it in this way. Now, they also sent a petition to the Pennsylvania legislature in December of 1781, asking them to, quote, "We pray this honorable house, in whose justice and wisdom we confide," a little bit of niceness goes a long way, "will grant leave to bring in a bill for recognizing the right of persons disowned by the people called Quakers." Hold on a minute. What they're asking, because I don't want to read the whole thing, is they were asking to remain to have access to the grounds and properties owned by the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, meeting houses, schoolhouses, burying grounds, etc. Because they did not they did not consider themselves as splitting from the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, but simply just another faction. Guess what? The Pennsylvania legislature basically just kind of ignored it, and which was a way of saying, you guys need to figure this one out for yourselves. Why are you bothering us? We're fighting Britain at this point. We have bigger issues. Now, who were some of these Free Quakers? You may recognize some of these names, and you may even recognize the gentleman on the screen. That is Timothy Matlack. He ultimately became a colonel in the 5th Rifle Battalion and was part of the group of men that crossed the Delaware. He was also a member of the Committee of Public Safety and eventually held office in Pennsylvania. Various relatives. If we sort of jump down to the bottom of that list, Lydia Dara ended up sharing information with General Washington from British troops while the general was headquartered out in White Marsh, out in Montgomery County. And Elizabeth Griscom, anyone recognize her? You may know her by a slightly different name. Betsy Ross. Yes, and she actually outlived all of the other original members, dying at in a very advanced age in 1836. Now, eventually, these folks and others, this is just a partial list, ended up holding their first meeting of worship in 1781, which does coincide with some of the documents we saw that they printed and distributed. By 1783, they started raising funds to construct their own meeting house. They saw the writing on the wall. the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting folks were not going to allow them access, unfortunately. By June of 1784, the meeting house was constructed, which you can see here in this 1859 image. However, by 1836, especially with only one active member still living, they decided to continue their focus on assisting those in need, and the meeting house began to be rented out. Like a lot of members of the Society of Friends, after the war, when some of their initial reasoning for departing meeting had ended, some of those folks either became joined the Episcopal Church, the Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church. Some went back to their original meetings and were welcomed back for the most part. And some just drifted away from organized religion altogether. So really, the fact that this meeting did not remain as active as it once was is really no surprise. Ultimately, a couple of sources have crunched some numbers, and we think only about 539 or 4.1% of the disownments were due to military activity or something along those lines. You know, that's not a lot considering how many people were actively members. I did want to point out that in October of 1952, Samuel Wetherell, who was the clerk for the Free Quakers and kind of a figurehead for that group, was they welcomed him back into meeting, and he was vindicated and approved to join back. So kind of interesting idea there. However, being in New Jersey, I felt compelled to share some things about the Friends here as well. Similar transgressions of members of the various meetings in places such as Haddonfield, Burlington, Chesterfield, Mount Holly, Little Lake Harbor, and Salem, New Jersey. Many of it's noted in their meeting minutes as well as having joined in the military discipline or in similar language. What's also interesting is that some of those folks in the New Jersey locations were also noted for assisting those who were joining up in the military by helping with medical aid and in other ways. So in that case, it's a little bit different than what we've seen in Pennsylvania, especially in Philadelphia. So that may be an indication of, again, that larger schism that I referenced earlier. A lot of the places in New Jersey being a slightly more rural locations, whereas the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, it was centralized around the city and included the suburb locations. Now, while traveling through the region in early 1777, James Pemberton noted in his diary the suffering of some friends with, quote, imprisoned this week at Gloucester for reading in their meetings the epistle issued by the meetings for sufferings, and several friends at Mount Holly and Evesham were taken up for refusing to bear arms. They were taken up by the government here in New Jersey. So you see that a lot as well. But Pemberton also notes just other happenings as well. But again, a lot of the same issues at play here, changes of conscience. So after the American War for Independence, as I mentioned, some friends were welcomed back into meeting. Some never left or considered themselves having ever left. And the Free Quakers kept meeting until 1836. But did this issue of conscience ever go away? And the short answer is no. Minutes of the Falls monthly business meeting noted a handful of times in the 1810s, similar notations such as, quote, were known to train with the militia. Neither of them was found to be in a disposition to condemn this conduct. So even with the War of 1812 looming, male members felt compelled to support that cause. We also have a lot of information about Samuel Comfort, He was a descendant of a Quaker family in Fallsington as well. And he counted as some of his relatives, folks with the last name of Moon and Stackhouse, who are very pivotal to Fallsington even to this day. He became a volunteer in the Union Army in October of 1861 and ended up joining with what later became known as the Anderson Troop, which served as a bodyguard for General Buell in Louisville, Kentucky. After the Battle of Shiloh, he became disabled with typhoid fever and received an honorable discharge. However, that was in April of 62. By July of 1863, hey, guess who's back at it? Captain Comfort, with his own money and using likely his influence in the area, he held a muster for organizing troops to form what was called the Bucks County Troop. And they actually were in Philadelphia at Camp Cooch for a while. And later in later in 1864, were reorganized until Colonel John E. Winecoop's company and assigned to the front, and were very active in a lot of the fighting later in Virginia. He was eventually mustered out and honorably discharged from the service with the rank of major of the 1st Provisional Pennsylvania Cavalry in July of 1865. And we're very fortunate to have in our collection at Fallsington this very flag. It's painted silk. We also have a portion of his military uniform jacket and his campaign journals, which, even just from a personal perspective, not necessarily a military perspective, are just incredible. But it didn't stop at the Civil War. Even in Fallsington, here is the registration card for Edward Randolph Moon of Fallsington to not join in the military service. And it might be a little bit hard to see, but number 12 on the card on the far left, it notes the reason as being a member of the Society of Friends. And that is dated June of 1917. Earlier that year, the Philadelphia yearly meeting held the Friends National Peace Conference in Philadelphia, and they publicized this ad here on the right portion of your screen, highlighting the reasonings why peace was better than fighting. So again, publicly, the Philadelphia yearly meeting is holding true to that idea of the peace testimony, very, very outwardly as well. However, look at that, Edward Randolph Moon. Here's his cards noting that he joined in February of 1918, and he was honorably discharged in August of 1918 to, quote, accept a commission and, quote, reported 0% disabled. So something compelled him to join. And the one thing I both love and hate about history is research is never done. So what compelled him to join? I'm just waiting for all of these diaries from all of these people over the centuries to kind of fall into our laps so we can get in their own words what compelled them, especially amongst the Society of Friends, who has such a strong conviction of maintaining peace. In 1947, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the American Friends Service Committee and the British Friends Service Council for their work, the 300 years of Quaker efforts to heal rifts and oppose war. In particular, they chose this time to recognize that given the work amongst those two specific organizations, helping starving children and citizens in Europe generally during World War I and World War II. And that actually is a photo from the award ceremony in 1947. So outwardly, it's also being recognized. To this day, the Quaker United Nations office has staff work with people in the UN, multilateral organizations, government delegations, and non-governmental organizations to achieve changes in international standards and practice. Quakers are known for speaking out against injustice and war, issues that are incompatible with our vision of a world in which peace and justice prevail. There are also lots of informal groups of people all over the world who, because of their Quaker belief system, have set up small organizations or small areas to help folks who are actively in the military, even if they're not Quakers themselves. Recognizing that you know, folks do need that extra amount of support, and you know, doing what they can because of their own personal beliefs to reach out and do so. So that whirlwind tour of Fallsington and the very brief long history of some of the Quakers in Fallsington, primarily in the American War for Independence and elsewhere, I hope has been enjoyable for you. I had great fun researching it. I would certainly welcome the opportunity for any questions if there's time from folks here in person with us. And I would love to have all of you come visit us in Fallsington. It's a great place. We have a walking tour booklet. Our next big event, Historic Fallsington Day, is coming up on Saturday, October 8th. The streets are closed off. We have lots of different local craft vendors and entertainment. And I promise even a bit of history while you're there too. So our goal is to make history engaging and fun, and to have the continued support of our community, which I would include all of you as part of our community, whether you're here with us virtually or in person. So thank you. So any questions? Oh no. Yeah.
Again, I'm wondering, you mentioned that in Philadelphia, some of friends were rejoined their meeting.
Yes.
Did you have time to look at the subsequent Falls meeting minutes to see whether that happened with any of the names you had?
I had not come across to that. And it may just be one of those things, maybe it was mentioned, maybe it wasn't. And I will say, as much as I am thankful that the friends in their meeting minutes were so detailed in their information, it does take quite a while. So that's definitely something I am hoping to follow up on. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, anybody else?
I have a question.
Yes.
So there was a lot to absorb. So
Yes.
Did any of the friends during the Revolutionary War join the British side?
Not that I'm aware of. Now, that being said, there certainly were folks who did, and especially I know for you folks here that was a question that one of your speakers addressed. So for me, it's given how frequently Pennsylvania reorganized their military. I was focusing on some of the information that became available, but it doesn't appear to be. And part of the clue that I'm thankful that folks who know a bit more about the military organization in colonial Pennsylvania pointed out to me is the specific use of the word association by in the meeting minutes. Because at that point, I was not as familiar with how things were organized. So, and then to find some of those same names in those attendance lists was very much a big aha moment, whether they were noted as being in Falls Township or some of the other local townships. So, yeah.
And also retired in social sciences. And I'm really interested for it's called the moral economy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you take that idea
Mhm.
and you link that to what was embodied within Quakerism,
Mhm.
and you've touched on some of these issues, and they recur about war and peace, about slavery,
Mhm.
non-slavery, among Quakers
Mhm.
who were also in commerce.
Mhm.
Now, the interesting point about this book is that he speaks about what gets crowded out,
Mhm.
and the Quaker values, and I have to read, look up and read, think what we mean by values. And to some extent, you have laid out the historical terrain.
Mm.
We don't have access to the kind of information as to what was crowded out.
Mhm.
When issues of are we a colony or are we a free people?
Mhm.
Are we against slavery and in commerce at the same time? These are spiritual locations,
Mhm.
if we can use that,
Mhm.
which split the moral consciousness of Quaker values.
Mhm.
And of course, everything has to be defined,
Mhm.
but those Quaker values have been transmitted over many, many years.
Mhm.
And I look at my own history, it's personal history, that I stem from the free blacks of Maryland, and who were freed in the 1850s.
Mhm.
And I recently covered some of the literature dealing with history, and I'm ignorant of women preachers. And I think they were relatively more common, or they were present among the English Quakers.
Mm.
I don't know whether they were present among the Pennsylvania Quakers, Jersey Quakers. That's the issue structure
Mhm.
that we, I'm a retired political scientist, that's where we approach cleavages.
Mhm.
What was it that divided people?
Mhm.
What was it that brought them together? How they treat Indians? How they treat women?
Mhm.
These are issues that get at the moral underpinning,
Mhm.
which have been present and have continued over time in Quaker theology.
Mhm.
So it's just some comment, and your talk was very informative.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I have to say, in putting this together, I could have spent, I could have, probably found enough information to talk about the Philadelphia Quakers. I mean, people have spent lifetimes focusing on, like you're saying, these sort of specific areas of interest that in and of themselves are huge books of research. So for me, my goal was to try and provide some of that background information, and then put it back towards some of the Fallsington members as well. But yeah, definitely there's a lot out there. I know in Fallsington, I don't have the information right on the tip of my mind right now, because I was focusing so much on the American War of Independence. But they hosted at their meeting house speakers on abolition, who were making sort of the lecture circuit, if you will. And some of that information is not gleaned from the meeting minutes, but rather from newspaper advertisements, whether it was a Quaker specific newspaper or more broadly. So that's what was so interesting about the World War I and some of the World War II information that's out there, is those were from broader publications, city newspapers like Philadelphia and elsewhere, where especially understandably, the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting was posting this information, and kind of suggesting that, everyone should be allowed to sort of determine what their conscience is leading them to do and what's best for them. So the wording is very purposeful. So, okay.
I had another question, but you do.
Yes.
No, go ahead.
As someone who walked here from meeting for worship at Trenton
Yes.
and found out about this lecture just last night. Thank you. This is really important.
Oh, thank you.
And you presented it beautifully.
Thank you.
So I kept focusing on the people who are called Quakers. I thought that was an interesting phrase. I've been trying to think, well, when did this word Quaker come about? Because they were originally friends,
Mhm.
and some people use only friends.
Mhm.
May I ask, how do you call yourself?
Well, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I am not a member of any friends meeting house myself. So I came at this as a very interested person, interested in history. And given my experience, sorry, the light here is getting weird. I came at this from an interest in history of some of my own family who were some of those early settlers, but I'm not a member of any meeting. And you know, it's a journey all of us are on. Some would say your entire life. So I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, I noticed that as well. And that's why I wanted to make sure I included some of those quotes for that very reason. You know, what are they calling themselves? And that one group in Philadelphia, I mean, you saw it plain as anything, we're calling themselves free Quakers. I don't know if there's like a definite date or if it was kind of used interchangeably.
It was much earlier than I thought.
Yeah, and like bold, all caps, hard to miss, which, you know, was the obvious idea. So
I'm just saying that we too just found out about this 3 hours ago. So maybe the publicity to local meetings, you know, because this was a surprise.
well,
I'm also from Princeton.
oh, wonderful. Well, we're just delighted to have all of you here with us, and we're glad you could make it, even with the short notice. Yeah, it's one of those things. You know, whether it's here in Trenton at the Trent House or over in Fallsington, it's how do we better market ourselves, and where do we put our energy to do so? And I know, and I'll speak on behalf of Sam, if I may be so bold, is to say, you know, we're always open to suggestions on, you know, maybe something we've tried in the past or haven't tried yet, and how we can be better about that. So thank you. Okay.
I just as a side note, I found a very old newspaper clipping last weekend about Fallsington and the old history. So
Yeah.
I mean, I found it clearing out, basically, but it was probably, you know, it's a long time ago, and it's still sounded like a very interesting place historically.
It is, and we'd be delighted to welcome any of you there for a tour. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Brochures and our calendar of events through the end of this year. Even though we are a Quaker founded community, it was never a closed community in any sense of the word. In the later 19th century, with all of the religious revivals and things, Fallsington found itself being a benefactor of Isaiah Williamson, who was very active in the Episcopal Church, and very, very generous with his hard-earned money, and actually helped to have funds available to not just build the Episcopal Church in town, which is lovely with Gothic windows and all sorts of interesting elements, but also I believe it was his niece, also helped build the Fallsington Library, which in and of itself is also an old building and worth checking out. So we do have a walking tour booklet of town if you happen to stop by when we're not in the office, and you can purchase that. And that's fun to do because you're always going to notice something new and different. And there's just lots to see. So,
One question.
yeah.
I wonder if the families of the men who joined the military, were they read out of meeting or anything like that? It was completely individual.
It seems to be, and again, some of them were welcomed back in. It was interesting to find, and all the details are running around in my head too quickly right now, but the idea was, and maybe that was part of the reason for the delayed disownment, was the idea that folks would come to terms with their conscience and rejoin, or would be welcomed back. So that's an interesting idea. And again, this as an organization is still evolving. I would certainly encourage you, the internet can be your friend. It's not just for sharing cute cat and dog pictures, but there is a lot of information put out by various organizations here in the United States, but also abroad, that are the official word of those Quaker based organizations. So it's, there's a lot out there, and a lot of them do have a history tab, which is always interesting, especially considering, the impact of, not just the American War of Independence, but subsequent wars, again, World War I, World War II, which as I noted, those two service organizations were commended for. So, and what's interesting is once you win the Nobel Peace Prize, you're now part of a group of organizations who can then nominate other groups and organizations to win it. And the AFSC, I hope I'm getting the acronym correct, has nominated a few different other organizations for that prize as well, which is just a really neat idea.
Sorry, just briefly, I think that even to take the lens of the various wars out of it, I think many things here speak to the splintering and many different groups with lots of the revivalist, evangelical, everything going on, that kind of turbulence, and also the very understandable human need to keep yourself pure, right? So people were read out of meeting for marrying and whatever. So, and that's not a way to live and survive into the next century. So as see that there's a willingness to try to, or at least later, a willingness to try to be
yes,
and more inclusive, like drop this.
Right.
Working with individuals and their conscience, I love that word tenderly, right? Because that's kind of what they're charging, is what we call caring counsel or something like that they work not to condemn in the best times, right? But to embrace a person's or a family or whatever, to try to let them come to what they have to do.
Yeah. So again, thank you. I'm not seeing anything on the chat here, so I one last call for any questions via chat. You can always reach out to me at Fallsington. The phone usually works. Sometimes email usually works, but we are on Facebook and Instagram, and our website, our new website as of May, is up to date. So that's also a great place if you're more connected to technology than some of the rest of us. We certainly invite you to visit us virtually as well. So again, thank you everybody online and here in person. Really had a great afternoon and hope to see everybody again soon.
Thank you, Kimberly.